My name is Esteban Ramírez. I was born 47 years ago in the small town of San Juan de los Lagos, in the heart of Jalisco, Mexico, a place where faith is stronger than the storms that sometimes ravage our fields. I grew up surrounded by processions, candles lit on cold nights, and stories of miracles told by the elders in the shadow of the cathedral. From a very young age, I realized my life would be dedicated to something greater than myself. At 18, I entered the seminary, and I never looked back. In 2018, I was the parish priest of the Church of Nuestra Señora de la Asunción, an old building full of history and imbued with the faith of generations. It was October, and the city was already preparing for the Dia de los Muertos celebrations. I always loved this time. There was something comforting in celebrating life even in the face of death. But that year, something very different awaited me. It all began on a stifling afternoon. I was organizing the preparations for the Grand Mass on November 2nd. We had ordered flowers, candles, images, and I felt more tired than usual. My chest ached in a strange way, as if someone was squeezing my heart with a heavy hand. I ignored it. I thought it was stress or maybe just age catching up. It was during a small meeting with the volunteers that everything happened. I remember feeling a sudden dizziness, as if the floor opened up beneath my feet. The voices around me began to fade, echoing as if in a tunnel. I tried to lean on the table, but my legs failed me. I fell. People rushed to help me, but all I saw was the ceiling light growing ever more distant until it disappeared. I felt no pain, only an immense sense of peace, as if suddenly all the burdens I had carried my entire life had been lifted from my shoulders. That's when I realized I was hovering above my body. I saw everything. My desperate parishioners trying to revive me, the ambulance being hastily called. I should have panicked, but no. It was as if an invisible hand caressed my head and said, "It's all right, Esteban." It was then that I heard music. It wasn't ordinary music. It was something that seemed to come from the stars, the mountains, the waters. Each note seemed made of light. And amidst that divine melody, I saw a figure approaching. It was a man in white. His face radiated love and wisdom. A shiver ran through my soul. I knew who it was. Pope Francis. But he wasn't sick or dead. He was still alive in 2018, yet there before me he seemed different, younger, lighter, as if he carried centuries of hope within him. He smiled and said something that would change my life forever. I could hardly believe what I was seeing. Before me in that atmosphere of living, pulsating light stood Pope Francis, his countenance overflowing with a tenderness that human words cannot contain. It wasn't just a vision. I felt his presence as if I could touch him, as if my entire soul were connected to his. He drew closer. His white robes floated lightly, as if moved by an invisible breeze. His eyes shone with a light that seemed to carry the very love of God encapsulated within. When he opened his mouth to speak, his voice resonated not just in my ears but within my heart. "Esteban," he said with a calm smile, "you have been chosen to witness something many will not understand at first, but which will transform the earth." My legs, or what remained of them there in that state, trembled. I wanted to ask what he meant, but my voice wouldn't come out. It was then that he extended his hand and touched my shoulder. That touch was more than physical. It was as if he transmitted directly into my soul a torrent of images and sensations. I saw crowds weeping. I saw churches full and deserts blooming. I also saw wars, famine, and despair. But above all, I saw a new era emerging from pain and destruction. "When I leave the earthly world," the Pope continued, "God will permit that, during a special Mass held in my memory, I will manifest myself to a chosen few, not to everyone, only those whose hearts are prepared to see beyond the veil." Those words echoed deeply within me. It was as if each syllable were carved into the very fabric of my existence. "This apparition," he explained, "will be the beginning of an irreversible spiritual transformation. It will not be the end of suffering, but the beginning of a new understanding among men. Many will resist, many will reject, but those who see will change the world." I was astonished. I still tried to ask, "And me, what is my role in this?" The Pope smiled again. like one who understands a child's anxiety before a great mystery. You must tell, do not fear mockery or scorn. Even if many doubt, plant the seed. Let the rain of time make the truth germinate. At that moment, tears, not made of water but of pure light, began to stream down my face. I knew this was real, more real than any mass I had ever celebrated, more real than any dawn I had seen over the hills of Jalisco. Then, as if obeying a silent call, Pope Francis began to move away, walking towards an immense golden door that appeared on the ethereal horizon. Before passing through it, he turned to me one last time. Prepare yourself. Esteban, the hour will come and you will be the witness. With those words he disappeared, and everything around me began to dissipate like mist under the morning sun. When the vision of Pope Francis and that golden light dissolved, I felt as if I were being pulled by an irresistible force. It was an uncomfortable sensation, like plunging abruptly into icy waters after floating in the warmth of a divine embrace. My consciousness began to narrow, as if being squeezed to fit back into a very small space, my body. Suddenly, I heard familiar voices. "Father Esteban, hold on!" The sound of sirens in the distance. Someone was holding my hand. Other people were praying, crying. The pain returned, excruciating in my chest and head. I opened my eyes with difficulty. Everything seemed blurred, distorted, as if I were seeing the world through a curtain of tears. I felt the oxygen mask being placed on my face and the paramedics discussing something about an imminent heart attack. I wanted to scream, to tell them what had happened, but I couldn't make a sound. I just let them take me, resigned, my heart torn between the celestial peace I had just experienced and the brutality of earthly life. In the ambulance, drifting in and out of consciousness, I relived every second of what had happened on that other plane. Every word from the Pope, every detail of that light-filled presence, was etched into me with a clarity that surpassed any memory I've ever had. I spent 4 days hospitalized in Guadalajara. They ran a battery of tests and, to the doctor's surprise, my heart was in good condition. There were no signs of a heart attack, just a brief arrhythmia and, according to them, a possible episode of syncope caused by stress. They diagnosed it as something of no major consequence. But I knew there was something much greater behind it. In the cold solitude of the hospital room, I asked myself hundreds of times, why me? I was not worthy. I always considered myself an ordinary priest, with flaws, fears, and even doubts that sometimes haunted me in the dead of night. I never sought visions or extraordinary experiences. My mission was simple: to serve, to love, to teach. So why would God choose me to carry such a message? Every time I questioned it, the answer came softly, like a whisper. Because you believe, even when no one else sees. It was in that room, still with the machines beeping around me, that I decided I could not keep what I had experienced to myself. Even if many laughed or called me a lunatic, even if my own church hesitated to accept my testimony, I had a clear mission: plant the seed, as the Pope had told me. I remained under observation for a few more days, and when they finally discharged me, I felt I was not the same man who had been rushed in there. Something inside me had awakened, something that could no longer be ignored. When I returned to San Juan de los Lagos, I knew my life would never be the same. Returning to San Juan de los Lagos after the experience was like returning to a house that no longer felt the same. The streets, the squares, the church where I had served for so many years, everything was the same and yet completely different to me. The first weeks were for physical recovery. My community was very welcoming, offering meals, prayers, and affection. Many believed I had just had a big scare, a little miracle, as some laughingly called it, but few knew of the real miracle I carried silently within my chest. I hesitated to speak. How could I tell them I had seen Pope Francis in a spiritual dimension while he was still alive among us, and that he had entrusted me with a message that would change the world? It would sound absurd, perhaps even heretical to some. But the urgency I felt in my heart was greater than the fear. So I started slowly. First, in conversations with my fellow priests in the region, I gathered a small group of close friends one Sunday afternoon. We were sitting on the benches in the church garden, the aroma of coffee and sweet bread floating in the air, and with a trembling voice I told them. I recounted the fall, the sensation of leaving my body, the vision of Pope Francis, the message about the future Mass, and the transformation that would follow. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. Some avoided my eyes. One of the priests, Father Luis, scratched his head and said cautiously, "Esteban, that was a beautiful experience. But it might have just been your brain trying to comfort you during the syncope. I've heard of those terminal hallucinations." I felt a pang of sadness. I had expected this, but it still hurt. Another priest, however, the young Francisco Mena, seemed troubled in a different way. His eyes shone as if something inside him had awakened. "And what if it's true?" he murmured. "What if God really is preparing something and we're too blind to see it?" That small spark of faith renewed my strength. If even one believed, it was already worth it. I then began to share my testimony discreetly with some of the faithful, not in public sermons, it wasn't time yet, but in confessions, in private conversations, during spiritual retreats. I spoke to those who showed a thirst for something greater, those whose eyes already shone with a longing for heaven. And something curious began to happen. Some people sought me out days later, saying they had had strange dreams. They dreamed of churches full of light, of the Pope smiling at them, of crowds singing in languages they didn't know. Others reported feeling an inexplicable peace during Mass, as if Christ himself were closer than ever. I began to realize that the transformation was already underway, albeit discreetly. Like seeds scattered by the wind, they were starting to sprout in unseen soil. Expectation grew in my chest. When Pope Francis departed this life, and I knew it wouldn't be many years, everything I had been shown would manifest, and I needed to be ready. Not as a protagonist, but as a witness. And witnesses don't choose the time or place, they just stand firm. Time passed. The year turned to 2019, then 2020, and life in the parish continued its usual rhythm, at least for those looking from the outside. But within me, every Mass, every confession, every small meeting seemed charged with a hidden meaning, as if we were all slowly walking towards something grand and irreversible. It was during this period that the first signs began to appear. 1. Thursday morning, as I celebrated the 7 o'clock Mass, I saw something strange. While consecrating the bread and wine, my eyes fixed on an elderly lady sitting in the second row, Doña Beatriz, a long-time faithful member, with white hair and a serene smile. As I lifted them towards heaven, I saw a golden light surrounding her head like a small halo. I blinked, thinking it was a reflection from the candles, but the light remained for a few seconds, pulsating gently before disappearing. I swallowed hard and continued the Mass as if nothing had happened. But inside me, something screamed, "It's beginning." The following week, a young woman named Lucia approached me after confession. She seemed nervous, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. "Father Esteban, I saw the Pope," she said, almost whispering. I raised my eyebrows, attentive. "What do you mean?" She explained that during the previous Sunday's Mass, she had closed her eyes at communion and for a brief moment had seen the figure of Pope Francis standing beside the altar, smiling at her. She said she felt such a profound peace that she burst into tears right there without understanding why. When I heard this, my heart almost stopped. "Have you told anyone about this?" I asked. "No, Father, I thought I was going crazy." I looked her straight in the eye and said with the firmness of one who knows he speaks the truth, "You are not crazy, Lucia. You have been blessed." I left there trembling. I began to discreetly record these episodes in a small leather-bound notebook I kept at the back of my closet. Every vision, every reported dream, every different sensation was noted with dates, names, and details. It seemed God was preparing a small silent army of sensitive souls, capable of seeing and hearing beyond the limits of the physical world. But not everything was light. As more people approached me with similar experiences, Reactions of resistance and scorn also began to emerge. Some parishioners started avoiding me, whispering behind my back. One or two even politely suggested I take a sabbatical to rest. Doubt is a weed that grows quickly in the garden of faith. There were days when I questioned myself. What if I was mistaken? What if it was all an illusion of my tired mind? But in those moments, I just had to close my eyes and remember Pope Francis's touch on my shoulder. The music made of stars, the golden door. It was real. I knew it. And all this was just the beginning. It was on a silent October night in 2020 that something happened. Something that, even after everything I had already experienced, left me speechless. I was alone in the church after the last Mass. For of the day, the altar was still lit by a few candles, and the scent of incense hung in the air like an invisible veil. I sat on the back pew, exhausted, my cassock still on my shoulders, trying to pray. But my mind was restless. I thought about Pope Francis, about the visions, about what was yet to come. I closed my eyes. And then it happened. The air around me seemed to change density, becoming heavy and sweet, as if space itself were imbued with something alive. I felt a gentle warmth envelop my body like an embrace. I slowly opened my eyes, and I saw. In the middle of the central aisle of the church, walking towards me, was him, Pope Francis. But this time, unlike the previous vision, he wasn't in full light or surrounded by celestial music. No. He was there more subtly, almost translucent, like a flame seen through frosted glass. He stopped a few meters from me. He said nothing. He just looked at me with an expression that mixed tenderness and urgency. His mere presence spoke more than any words. Instinctively, I knelt. Tears flowed freely, uncontrollably. In my mind, without actually hearing, I received a clear message. The time draws near. Prepare hearts. Warn. Those who believe will see. Those who do not believe will also be touched, though they may not understand. That night I understood something even deeper about the mission I had been given. It wasn't just about seeing the Pope at a future Mass. It was about a collective, silent spiritual awakening that would transcend any human structure. I remained there, kneeling, trembling, even after the image of the Holy Father faded into the air like mist dissolved by the wind. I got up with difficulty. My soul was ablaze. I took the leather-bound notebook and wrote down the message with trembling hands. I knew I needed to act. I knew I needed to speak more openly, even if it meant being judged, ridiculed, or pushed away. From that night on, something changed in my way of preaching. My homilies began to touch on deeper themes: invisible faith, the preparation of hearts, the importance of keeping spiritual eyes open for what was coming. Some understood, others did not, but I knew I was not alone. People from distant places began to write to me, letters, emails, simple messages. They reported dreams, visions, inexplicable sensations. It was as if the same breath was sweeping the world, awakening. Those who were ready, calling the scattered sheep to a new fold. That October night, under the silent roof of the old church in San Juan de los Lagos, I finally understood. We were not just spectators of a future miracle. We were part of it. After that night, the expectation within me became almost unbearable. Each morning seemed to carry the promise of something extraordinary. Every Mass, every glance exchanged with a parishioner, every word spoken at the altar was imbued with an invisible tension, as if the very fabric of time were stretching on the verge of tearing. It was like living in the shadow of a mountain, about to collapse in light upon the world. I began to observe everything more closely. Change was in the air. There was something different in the way people prayed. Some closed their eyes and smiled, as if hearing music others couldn't hear. Others, upon receiving the host, wept without knowing why. A spiritual hunger was being born in souls, a thirst that no earthly water seemed to quench. In my solitude, I began to prepare my spirit for the day Pope Francis would leave this world. I didn't know when that would happen, and to be honest, I hoped it would be a long time, because I knew that with his departure would also come the great trial for all of us. There were nights when I knelt before the tabernacle and wept, asking, God, for the strength to be faithful to the end. Do not let me falter, Lord. Do not let me betray the trust you have placed in me. A part of me still doubted if I would be able to bear the mission. I was just Esteban, a simple priest from a forgotten small town in the interior of Mexico. I wasn't a great theologian, nor a recognized visionary, just a man who loved God with all his heart. But then, amidst my doubts, small miracles sustained me. One morning, I found an anonymous letter left at the church door. It was handwritten in simple, almost childlike Spanish. It said, Father Esteban, I dreamed I saw the Pope at our Mass. He told me the light will come soon and that the priest who taught me to pray knows this. Thank you for being faithful. I treasured that letter like a relic, a silent confirmation that I was not alone, that even without knowing it, I was already touching souls prepared to receive the new era. Another time, a child of only 6 years old looked at me during Mass and, smiling, said to her mother, Mommy, the man in white is with the priest. These small sparks of mystery sustained me on difficult days, but there was also resistance. Some members of the diocese began to discreetly question my preaching. I received subtle invitations to rest, to reflect on the responsibility of words. A bishop, gentle but firm, suggested I be more prudent in my homilies, avoiding sensitive topics. I felt the weight of the cross I carried, but deep down I knew, when the time came, no resistance would be able to stop what God had already sown, and the spiritual clock continued to tick. Each invisible chime brought closer the moment when the entire earth would breathe differently. I lived in expectation, yes, but it wasn't a paralyzing fear. It was a sacred anticipation, the same kind I imagine the prophets felt while awaiting the coming of the Messiah. Something immense was coming, and my heart could already hear its steps in eternity. As the end of 2020 approached, a sense of urgency settled in the air, like an invisible electric current running through the city. I could feel it in the confessions, in people's eyes during Mass, even in the heavy silence of the cold December nights. The world outside seemed crazed. Pandemics, political conflicts, natural tragedies. Many came to me saying they felt something was about to happen, but they couldn't explain what. I just listened, and when appropriate, sowed small truths. In conversations, like someone discreetly planting seeds in an arid field. Inside, I prepared myself. I began dedicating even more time to silent prayer, not just praying traditionally, but surrendering my entire being, emptying myself of Esteban so that only God could fill the space. I gathered a few souls who knew what I had experienced. Lucia, Doña Beatriz, the young Francisco Mena, and a few others who had shown clear signs of spiritual sensitivity. We formed a discreet prayer group without fanfare. Our sole purpose was to keep ourselves ready for the moment the light would tear through the veil. We prayed together on Saturday mornings, in a small room next to the church, away from prying eyes that might misunderstand. We sang, meditated on the Word, shared dreams and visions, and above all we strengthened each other in faith. Each meeting was a breath of eternity. One morning, while we were praying, Lucia entered a sort of trance. She wept softly and whispered, I see multitudes kneeling. I see the Pope standing at the altar, and he smiles, and the whole earth changes. All of us in silence felt a powerful presence fill the room. Some cried, others just closed their eyes and let themselves be enveloped. It was as if heaven itself had descended upon us for a few brief minutes. I left that prayer session with absolute certainty. The time was near. I then decided to write a letter. It was a letter intended to be read only after Pope Francis's death. In it, I described my complete experience, every detail, every word received. I instructed that it be read during a special Mass in honor of the Holy Father, for all who wished to hear. I entrusted the letter to the young Francisco Mena, who promised to guard it like a reliquary. It was my final act of preparation. I didn't know if I would be alive to see what was coming, nor if I would be worthy to witness with my own eyes the promised manifestation, but I understood with a clarity that burned in my chest that it was not my role to control time nor the outcomes. My role was to be faithful until my last breath, and so I lived day after day with my soul keeping vigil like the servant waiting for his master's return in the dead of night, with a heart ready to fall to its knees before the glory that would soon descend upon the earth. From the day I returned from the hospital and understood the mission entrusted to me, one word came to permanently inhabit my heart: wait. Not an hour, anxious wait, nor a desperate wait like someone fearing the loss of something precious. It was a different kind of waiting, sacred, silent, woven from faith and surrender into God's hands. I learned that God's timing is not like ours. What seems like haste or delay to us is simply perfection to Him, and I needed to align my heart to this divine rhythm. There were days when, kneeling before the silent altar, my mind wanted to rush ahead. Imagine what that Mass where the Pope would appear would be like. Try to calculate dates, speculate on signs. But every time I let myself get carried away by these human anxieties, I felt a gentle sadness, as if the Spirit reminded me, it is not for you to know the times or seasons that the Father has fixed by His own authority. And then I would quiet myself again. I began to live each Mass as if it were unique, each encounter with the faithful as if it were eternal. The experience I had outside my body hadn't just given me a glimpse of what was to come. It had taught me to see the hidden beauty in small moments, to recognize eternity vibrating beneath the surface of ordinary life. Pope Francis continued his mission in the world with his tenderness and quiet strength. I followed him from afar with silent prayers, wishing deep down that he still had many years of life. After all, the longer he was among us, the more time we would have to prepare our hearts for what would come later. I never wished for his death, never. On the contrary, my love and respect for him grew immensely after what I experienced. My hope was not in his departure, but in God's promise that the transformation would happen at the right time, when hearts were ripe. Sometimes, while celebrating Mass, I felt a different breeze pass through the church, a spiritual freshness as if angels passed silently between the pews, touching souls. Sometimes I saw illuminated faces, eyes brimming with emotion for no apparent reason. Small signs, discreet, like flowers blooming in winter. These moments sustained me. I knew that as long as we lived with our eyes turned toward the heavens, God's time would find us ready. I knew the promised manifestation would not be a spectacle to convince skeptics, but a divine breath to strengthen the small and humble, those who kept the faith even when it seemed foolish to do so. Today, as I write these words, my heart is at peace. I don't know when it will happen. I don't know who will see, but I know, with the certainty one has of the sunrise after a long night, that it will happen. And until then, I continue planting small seeds of hope, watering them with my tears, waiting for the time when the entire earth will blossom under the light of the promise. Today, as I share all this with you, sitting in this small sacristy in San Juan de los Lagos, I realize how profoundly my life has changed since that out-of-body experience. Not just because of the vision itself, nor just because of the responsibility of carrying such a grand message, but because of what sprouted within me afterward, an unbreakable hope. I no longer see the world as I saw it before. Every person who passes me on the street, every child running through the square, every elderly person slowly entering the church to light a candle. They are all, to me, a living part of the great, divine plan that is unfolding, even if our earthly eyes cannot yet comprehend it. I know many would not believe me. I know that even within the church, with all its holiness, there is room for doubt, for caution, and I understand. True faith was never made of easy certainties. It is often a leap in the dark, a desperate bet on God's love against all the evidence of the world. And that is how I live now, like someone walking between two worlds. On one side, the material world with its days passing alike, its turbulent news, its silent pains. On the other, the spiritual world I briefly glimpsed, where light is more real than any stone, and where love is the very substance of existence. I wait. I wait with my heart keeping vigil, like an old sailor who feels the change in the wind before the storm comes. I await the Holy Father's departure, not with sadness, but with the reverence of one who knows that death, for God's friends, is merely the first step of a new mission. I await the prophesied Mass, the one where he will manifest himself to the spiritual eyes of some, and through them will forever change what it means to believe on the face of the earth. And more than anything, I await the silent transformation that has already begun. I see it in the eyes of the humble, in the silent fervor of the little ones, in the courage of those who love without being noticed. Like seeds sown in forgotten fields, these souls will sprout when the light of the new era dawns. I don't know how much time I have left in this world. I don't know if I will be worthy to witness with these eyes of flesh what my soul's eyes have already seen, but that matters little. Because, after that experience, I understood something that changed everything. True faith is not believing when we see. It is believing even when everything around seems to deny it. And so I continue day after day, Mass after Mass, prayer after prayer, with an open heart, with eyes fixed on eternity, with a soul ready at the right moment to recognize the light when it finally tears through the heavens and touches the earth.